Okay. You got the button pushed?
Yep, I do.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Today is Monday, June 23rd, 2014, and this is the second meeting of June for the District 64 Board of Education. Terry, as one of your final job performances as a position of secretary, would you please take the roll?
Dan Collins.
Here.
Dathan Paterno.
Here.
Scott Zimmerman.
Here.
Anthony Borelli.
Here.
John Heidi.
Yeah.
Vicki Lee.
Here.
And Terry Cameron, too.
Thank you, Terry. There are a couple of remarks I'd like to make prior to getting started. I just want to let everybody know that the position of secretary, the board was accepting applications for the position of board member up until 4 o'clock today. As of right now, we've received 12 applications for this position. And of course, the position of secretary will be filled once the new individual is seated, and then the board will decide on whom to fill that position. As it stands right now, on the 30th of this month, the board will have a closed session to discuss the applicants. The board on the 7th of July will hold an open session to interview the applicants, followed by deliberations in closed session. At that point, the board will decide whom it will select to fill the seat, and that person will be inducted or brought onto the board during the board planning session to be held over the weekend on Friday evening the 11th and on Saturday the 12th. The evening session of the 11th will be in open. The 12th, the morning of it will be in closed session. The afternoon will be in open. That's the provisional plan as we speak right now. I think we're all set with that then. So, that being said, we also have tonight the presentation of the prestigious Judith L. Snow Awards. And these awards are given to those students of the district who portray a high ethical leadership quality. This is an envious quality that all of us strive to and would like to achieve. These students are special indeed. So, Dr. Bender.
Thank you, Dr. Borelli. On behalf of ELF this evening, we have with us Connie Michaels, who will be giving out the awards, telling us a little bit about our individual winners from both Lincoln and Emerson. Once she has given us that information, each of the students will come around to board members and shake their hands. A little bit easier for them to come around than it is for all of you to go out there. So, Connie?
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Is that okay? Hi. Judith Snow is a Park Ridge resident and dedicated member of the League of Women Voters. Friends and colleagues describe her as conscientious, decent, dutiful, full of integrity, honorable, and principled. Upon her death, the League of Women Voters created the Judith L. Snow Memorial Fund. The fund was then donated to the District 64 Elementary Learning Foundation, which created the Judith L. Snow Ethical Leadership Award. Its purpose is to foster awareness and respect for ethical behavior in a leadership role among District 64 8th grade students. These students lead with integrity, selflessness, dependability, caring, and fairness. It is my pleasure to present the 2014 winners of the Judith L. Snow Ethical Leadership Award. From, let's see, we'll start over here. From Emerson School, this is Dina Salemi. This is Matt Nasseri. From Lincoln School is Julia Autonomy. And this is Randy Christopher. Dina is caring and compassionate. Her humility and nurturing tendencies set her apart. Matt demonstrates selflessness with ease. His devotion to others is unwavering. Brandon's strongest attribute is dependability and service to others. He does so with a smile. Julia epitomizes fairness. She leads by example and inspires others to do their best. All four of these outstanding individuals make a positive difference in their schools and communities. Their dedication to ethical leadership is inspiring. Please join me in congratulating this remarkable group of young adults. To add, you can find more details about this remarkable group in the report. You have more details in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to walk
Very nice
outside.
outside.
Yeah.
We're all very jealous.
If I were you, yeah.
Well, as the qualities that these four folks show, as wonderful as they are, I'm sure there are many, many other students and folks in our district who present themselves with many of the same qualities. And I'm sure the decision to choose these final four folks was difficult, as I'm sure there are many other folks also as deserving. But these are certainly wonderful individuals, and their qualifications are just supreme. As they leave the room, unfortunately, we are also having some folks leave the district. And I wanted to get into this after the Judith Snow Award so as not to take away from the accomplishments of our students. But we have some administration who are leaving the district, and it would not be appropriate to let them leave without acknowledging their qualities and their accomplishments over the years. And the first person I'd like to single out is Dr. Terry Bresnahan. Vicki, I've asked Vicki to say a few words on behalf of the board for Dr. Bresnahan.
Dr. Bresnahan, you came to us in 2010 and as the director from an Addison school where you were there the director of IT. And the things that you've done in your short amount of time will be appreciated by all of us. You implemented the tech coaches in every school, and it was not well received in every single one of them. And you made it something that is really well received, and they participate in classes on Wednesdays, and you manage that initiative. And it's really going to help us when we go one-to-one. You also worked with administrators on the BAC committee and analyzed with teachers and students and other district members, looking at what we currently have, which was a 3-to-1 initiative with products, and helped facilitate that group to make a choice to go one-to-one. And even though we talked about the device, I think this community well received the ability to move forward with that. So we, of course, are grateful for that. And on a personal level, when you weren't looking at one-to-one, you had a meeting where you encouraged all the board members to come meet with you. I know Dr. Hinton was there in our session where we actually saw the device. And to take it one step further, you encouraged us to go to one of the schools. And I had the fortune of going to Lincoln and seeing it in use, which again is so much more important because I'm a visual learner, to see the students use that and tend to see how the teachers are going to use that. So you will be remembered as we move forward. I think we have the foundation and the platform, and on behalf of the board, we will miss you.
Thank you, Vicki, and on behalf of myself, thank you, Dr. Bresnahan, for your efforts in leading us in technology. And best wishes as you go forward with your new position. You betcha. Our next administrator leaving unfortunately, I did not spend enough time with personally, but the few moments or the few times that I was able to spend time with him, I always came away very impressed. And Dathan, I've asked Dathan to say a few words about Jim Even.
It's my privilege, Jim, to speak directly to you this evening. I've had the privilege of knowing you for about 16 months now. You were the first administrator to take the time to welcome me to the board and to introduce me to some of the ins and outs of how things work around here. I've worked with you on a number of situations and some sticky problems where you've always been a real stand-up guy. I picked up a few really key character traits in the 16 months in which I've known you that have really multiplied my respect for you. And I'm going to beg your indulgence to embarrass you for just a few moments here. Number one, it's really transparent that your commitment and passion for students and their well-being, it's just really phenomenal. You don't just say that you care. I've witnessed your love and compassion for students. I've seen your tireless passion, and I found it exemplary. You've made yourself utterly, eminently available. Despite your outrageously committed schedule, you've always found time to meet, to correspond, to listen, and to instruct me. Like I said, I learned a great deal about how District 64 works, and I cannot thank you enough for that in our meetings. You are a superb listener. I've noticed that you are quite skilled at considering all sides of an issue or a conflict and respecting the needs, interests, and perspectives of all parties. And last, you've got a stellar sense of humor. As you know full well, when you work with children with a variety of needs in a district like ours, and even more so with their families, a sense of humor is about as important to your sanity as sunlight is to gardening, and you've got it. So I really appreciate that. In short, you embody so many of the characteristics that I believe define a true gentleman, and that's about the greatest compliment that I can pay you. I'm sure that I'm barely scratching the surface here, and that if the administrative staff took their time to compile a list of all your exemplary traits, they would take far longer and would embarrass you far worse than I already have in this short time. I believe that our district will miss you, even though I'm quite confident that your replacement will be amply qualified, committed, and expert. I personally will miss your presence here. I hope that you end your tenure at District 64 knowing that your talents have been appreciated and that your efforts have borne much fruit. Well done, faithful servant.
And personally, Jim, I too shall miss you, and the best to you whatever travels you may follow as you go on. You betcha. The next individual I'd like to talk to is about Dr. Philip Bender. Dr. Bender will be leaving us by the end of next week. Rarely have I ever come across somebody who has a good finger on the pulse of things, and you would anticipate things before they would happen, particularly letting us know what would happen at board meetings during public comments, and inevitably you were correct. But I've asked John Heidi to say a few words about Dr. Bender.
Thank you, Tony. Phil was the last remaining member of the board that interviewed and hired you 4 years ago. I'm very happy to express my appreciation for your contributions to the strong place that our district finds itself today. You first came to our attention, as you know, when we were conducting a nationwide search for our new superintendent in the winter and spring of 2010. At that time, you were already a successful superintendent in the New Prairie School District in New Carlisle, Indiana. You had successfully managed your district there in a difficult budget environment, and even in that environment, you had overseen the building of your district's first grades 6 through 8 middle school. Prior to going into school administration, for those who don't know, Phil had been a classroom teacher for over 20 years, and as a teacher, he had been named Teacher of the Year by the Indiana Congress of Parents and Teachers. We knew we needed an experienced, knowledgeable administrator for a district that expects excellence. Phil impressed the board with the breadth of his knowledge on key educational topics, from facilities to budgets, to the state politics affecting local schools, to new initiatives and curriculum. The board was also impressed with the professional working relationship and the level of trust that Phil had established with his faculty and its Teachers Association. Phil, you've had a number of successes as our superintendent over the past 4 years, but I'd like to highlight just 2 of them, if I may. The first is in the area of facilities, where we owe you a huge thank you. 4 years ago, as you know, the condition of our facilities was not on the board's or the community's radar screen at all. We knew our facilities were old, but the district satisfied itself with routine maintenance, and it pushed any larger issues down the road. You found yourself confronted with these issues, as I remember, in the very first week you were on the job, when we had a tremendous summer storm flood basements in our elementary schools and district headquarters, just as they were flooding residential basements throughout town. Remember talking to Phil on our cell phones as I was out of town, and Phil was all over the situation immediately and all weekend long. But Phil also saw the need to delve into the root causes for the issues facing our buildings. 4 years later, we have a comprehensive facilities maintenance plan, and we're working toward the other elements of a facility master plan. We've completed major upgrades to Carpenter, Franklin, and Field schools, and to Lincoln Middle School. While we know there's still significant work to do, including making sure that our completed upgrades at places like Carpenter are working as they're supposed to, we're miles ahead today of where we were 4 years ago on facilities. The other success I want to highlight comes from Phil's eye for talent and his unselfish style of management. As superintendent, Phil has had responsibility for our building principals and his immediate team of administrators at the district headquarters. I've been impressed consistently with the high quality of people, Phil, that you've brought to our district. You've also taken care, once you have a strong manager in place, to guide in private, but to stay out of that manager's way in public and let your team present their ideas and their expertise directly to the board. I suspect that a lot of our administrators have grown in that approach, and the board has been given the opportunity to hear a number of new voices and develop a deeper level of trust in the entire team. Finally, Phil, you've simply been a pleasure to work with. For 3 of the past 4 years, I worked closely with you as board president at agenda planning meetings and other phone calls and meetings throughout the weeks. You're a deeply decent and caring person. We know that in your commitment to, as you like to say, keeping kids first. We know that in your care and concern for your colleagues and board members as individuals, and in your love and pride in your own family. So at the end of the month, Phil will be moving on to tackle new challenges with the Prairie Grove School District 46 in Crystal Lake. We'll miss Phil, but it's exciting to think of the new things you can accomplish in Prairie Grove with your energy, your collaborative leadership style, and your passion for kids. So Phil, I wish you continued success, interesting challenges, and enthusiastic colleagues and partners as you embark on your next challenges. And I thank you for sharing your energies and your talent and your passion with us here in Park Ridge and Niles.
And Phil, may I add, I certainly will miss your efforts, and all the best of luck to you as you go further north. Thank you. And finally, we are losing one of our own. Terry Cameron is going to the high rarefied air of Colorado, and we will, yeah, rarefied indeed, and we will certainly miss. I will love our repartee. I will miss our repartee. But I've asked Scott Zimmerman to say a few words on behalf of the board for Terry.
Can't Dan do this?
I promised I would be nice. And it was easy to do. I've known Terry for a while now, and while I'm excited for you and your new opportunity as a community member, a fellow board member, a Washington parent and a friend, I think I speak for all of us when I say I'm really sad to see you go. Terry has a sharp mind and a quick wit, and while his tenure with us has been brief, he has still contributed immensely to our district. I don't think I've ever met anyone in business or in public service, community service, who approaches the decision-making process so diligently and thoughtfully. I remember when you were first running for school board, you'd reached out to me, gave me a call and said, hey, can we meet for coffee? I just want to talk to you about this. I have some questions, as I know you did with other board members at the time. So I know we went to Starbucks and you had great questions and you really had a grasp of the issues. You'd clearly done your homework. And at the end, I sort of gave a token courtesy. Feel free to call me if you ever want to, about this, if you have any other questions. And to my surprise, a few weeks later, you were calling me and saying, can we meet again? And that really impressed me. And what I'd come to learn in that time was that you had met with virtually every administrator in the central office. You had talked with multiple board members and every building principal out there. And what I realized you were doing was not just finding out, do you want to contribute and do you want to participate in this and volunteer your time? You were going deeper and saying, are my skills, are my abilities, will this be beneficial to the district? You were going that extra mile. And that's what I think you've approached every issue of this board with, is you're always digging deeper and always going the extra mile. And you're always making sure you're making the best possible decision for our community. Terry's a true family man with 3 of the nicest boys you're ever going to meet. He's a valued colleague and a good friend, and you will be missed. But on behalf of the community and the district, and I want to thank you for all that you've done, and I wish you sincere wellness and Godspeed in your new endeavors.
And certainly, personally, I really will miss your contributions and your insightfulness, so thank you.
Thank you.
Getting back to business, we are now up to our public comments, and I invite anybody in the audience who would like to make a public comment on an item that is not currently on our agenda. Please step forward, state your name. And not seeing anybody, I think we can roll right through that, and brings us right up to our spring map testing. Dr. Hinton.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to address the board tonight to share information specifically about student performance on the reading map and the math map assessments. So we have a number of resources in place to support individual student growth in District 64, and these are things that we've talked about together over the course of the past 2 years. But we have a rigorous core curriculum for all students. We have a flagship elective program that really cultivates our students' talents and interests at the middle school level. With support from our instructional technology coaches, we're in the process of designing and implementing exemplary 21st century learning experiences at each grade level. And this is actually part of Board Consensus Goal 2 and was addressed by Dr. Bresnahan in November in this spring. And this unit design will continue with the implementation of our 21st century learning plan and one-to-one initiative. And then finally, we will continue to design rigorous professional development for our teachers and maintain implementation expectations for ourselves as a staff. As you know, in education, just to think a little bit in terms of background around our assessment landscape, we describe assessments as being either formative or summative. And summative assessments provide us with summary information about student performance. So summative assessments are typically used to do something like assign a final grade, or evaluate a program, or evaluate performance at a systems level. And formative assessments are used to change instruction so that students have a more customized learning experience. So typically we use formative assessments to help us differentiate instruction for students. And the map is actually a unique tool in that we use it both as a formative and summative assessment. So we use it summatively to measure student achievement and growth over the course of a school year, but we use it formatively following our benchmark assessments. So following our benchmark assessments, we use students' RIT scores to put them in small instructional groups or customize instruction for classes. And we use it to assist students with setting individual academic goals. MAP just to give you a little bit of background about MAP, is similar to ISAT and now the PARC because it is aligned to state standards. It's aligned to the Common Core standards in English Language Arts and in math. And it differs in that it's a computerized adaptive test. So this means that the test responds dynamically to each student. So the difficulty of each question is determined by the student's response to the previous question. So if the student answers correctly, the test becomes more difficult. And if the student answers incorrectly, the next question is easier. So adaptive questioning can really accurately measure what a child currently knows and what a child needs to learn next. And MAP assessments can measure academic growth over time, sort of independent of students, of a student's grade or age. So MAP results are reported on what's called a RIT scale, and it's an equal interval scale, and we sometimes use the analogy that it's sort of like feet or inches. So you can measure a child's educational growth in sort of a similar way that you could measure a child's height from year to year. So in addition to RIT scores, we look at national norms because the MAP is given by many, many school districts across the United States and actually the world. So we can look at norms for comparison to individual or to group results. And because we've administered MAP in District 64 for several years, we have been able to identify local norms. So in terms of our performance on the MAP, the District 64 mean has increased over time and is consistently higher than the national mean. So we've established a target mean based on our average mean over the past 5 years. So our target RIT at each grade level in reading is equivalent to a national percentile rank in the high 60s to mid 70s. And our target mean at each grade level in math is equivalent to a national percentile rank in the high 60s to low 70s. Some key points for our 2014 data. I know you have the report which outlines some things that are very specific, but I'll just highlight some of our key points for us. As I mentioned, District 64's mean score at each grade level continues to be significantly higher than the national mean score in both reading and math. But when we use national norms, what we can notice is that this past spring, about half of our students performed above the 75th percentile on the reading map. And this spring, we see that the percentage of students performing above the 75th increased in 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. Also this spring, an average of 36% of students performed above the 75th percentile on the math map. This spring, for reasons that we'll talk about in a few minutes, the percentage of students performing above the 75th percentile decreased in math at nearly every grade level. When we look at our averages over the past 3 years, we see that we have typically an average of 47% of students performing above the 75th percentile on the reading map, and an average of about 40% of students performing above the 75th percentile on the math map. It's interesting from a curriculum perspective to look at performance at or above the 50th percentile. And sort of a good rule of thumb for high-performing districts is to expect 80% of your students to perform at the 50th percentile or better using national norms. In reading, we typically have about 80% of our students performing at the 50th percentile or better. And in math, prior to this school year, we had about 70 to 80% of our students performing at the 50th percentile or better, depending on the grade level. So this spring, the percentage of students performing at the 50th percentile or better decreased anywhere from 4% to 10% in math, with the exception of 6th grade, which has stayed pretty flat over time. When we look at cohort performance in reading, and to do this, I pulled our District 64 local norms. NWEA actually did a norm study in 2011 that makes it difficult to compare scores over time prior to that year. So when we look at this data, we're looking at our local norms. But just looking at our reading cohort performance data, we can see a reduction generally in the percentage of students at or below the 25th percentile for this year's graduating 8th graders and the current 7th grade class. And when we look at our cohort performance in math, using again our District 64 local norms, we see a similar trend in math for the class of 2014. There's a small decrease in the percentage of students performing at or below the 25th percentile. And for other cohort groups, the performance in math has been relatively constant, with the exception of this past year. This past year, we do see an increase in the percentage of students performing at or below the 25th percentile, and a decrease in the percentage of students performing above the 75th percentile. So several factors impacted our performance in the area of math this year. The first is the curricular changes based on the Common Core state standards. So this is something that we've also been talking about at the board table for the past couple of years. In some cases, because of the adoption of the Common Core, concepts are now addressed at different grade levels. And one of the things that our teachers have been committed to this past year is using formative assessments to identify gaps in student background knowledge before teaching grade level concepts. So our teachers have focused on assessing and providing background instruction. And in doing that, they've enabled students to master skills, but it's impacted the pacing of our program. And we knew that when we went to implement and focus on the standards. And this isn't something that's unique to District 64. It's something that we're all experiencing as we sort of realign the curriculum around the core standards. So we had anticipated a reduction in our MAP scores as a result of this changing curriculum. And I think we'll probably see the same thing play out on our ISAT scores, which we'll talk about in a minute. This year, we also implemented the Common Core Standards Aligned MAP. So our assessment now is also aligned with our new curriculum. And so we see changes in student performance because of changes in our assessment. And then last, as you know, this year we are implementing our new core curricular materials, K-8. And we had anticipated an implementation dip as a result of this new resource adoption. So as you know, an implementation dip is a documented phenomenon where schools experience decreased performance when they're implementing an innovation that requires new skills or new knowledge. So we would anticipate a return to higher achievement levels over the next 2 years as we continue to formatively assess our students and identify those gaps in terms of alignment to the curriculum and assist them with mastering those outcomes. In addition to reviewing RIT scores, we can use the MAP to measure the percentage of students meeting their growth targets. So NWEA has established targets for a student's expected growth over the course of the year on the MAP assessment. And this expected growth is projected based on a student's baseline RIT score and on his or her grade level. So when we look at growth targets, this enables us to ensure that all students are making academic progress, regardless of where they're performing in relation to the target. So expected growth is an important measure for all students, but especially for students who are performing significantly below the target or those who are performing significantly above it. And it's also very helpful to us when we're implementing a new curriculum, because it enables us to ensure that students are still growing despite a decrease in the percentage of students meeting or exceeding standards relative to a target. So according to NWEA, a district is experiencing average growth when 50% of students meet or exceed their growth targets. So typically, half the students meet their expected growth targets and half the students do not. But an NWEA 2006 growth norm study suggests that a district is actually experiencing ambitious growth when 63% of students meet or exceed their growth targets. And a district where 70% of students are meeting or exceeding their growth targets is experiencing aggressive growth. So districts where 70% of students are meeting or exceeding their growth targets are actually performing at the 90 to 95th percentile for growth. So that's really a significant accomplishment. So given this, a target of 70% is a really challenging goal to achieve around growth targets. So in addition to reviewing sort of our general MAP performance tonight, I also want to take a look at our performance related to Board Consensus Goal 1B. Okay? So Board Consensus Goal 1B was established this past summer at the board study session, and it was finalized at our October board meeting. And the goal reads, by November 1st, develop student growth goals measured by type 1, and we had indicated in that goal MAP, and type 2 assessments, which essentially are common formative assessments. So just to refresh our memories, type 1 assessments are assessments that are scored by a non-district entity, and they're administered either statewide or beyond Illinois. So for example, the MAP assessment or the ISAT or the PARC. And as I said, Board 1B specifically identifies the MAP assessment as our type 1 assessment for evaluating our performance. And then at the board study session, the board expressed the desire to set targets related to the percentage of students who were meeting their individual growth targets. So the targets that we proposed in October were that 58% of our students would meet their projected growth targets in reading as measured by the MAP assessment. And then in math, we decided that we would wait until after our spring MAP administration to identify a target. So we said based on the new curricular resource and on the implementation of the Common Core, we anticipate that we're going to have a new baseline in math. And we're going to want to use that information to help us set a new goal. And we can talk more about that in a minute. But it's important to keep in mind that in the past, District 64 hasn't focused explicitly on growth targets as a measure of systemic improvement. But that despite this, the percentage of students meeting their growth targets represents above average growth, and in some cases, approaching ambitious growth. So in 2014, the percentage of students meeting their growth targets in reading is actually approaching ambitious growth. It's significantly higher than it has been in past years. So currently, 60% of our students are meeting their growth targets in reading, which exceeds our 2014 board target of 58%. And this brings our new 6-year average up to 57%, which is above average growth for a school district. In math, the percentage of District 64 students meeting their growth targets decreased to 56.2%. And again, this is still indicative of above average growth for a school district. And our 6-year average is close to 60%, right? And you could argue that we're nearing ambitious growth in math. We're getting closer and closer to that 63% target. One thing I want to mention is there's a distinction between growing as an individual student and meeting your growth target on the MAP assessment, right? The MAP assessment helps us look at student growth in English language arts and reading and in math. But outside of the MAP assessment, student growth in District 64 is reflected in a variety of assessments, including classroom assessments and some of the common formative assessments that we've designed for the educational ends. In October, Mr. Even and I had shared several commitments for spring of 2014 related to the board consensus goals that focus on student learning. And one of the things that I wanted to do tonight was update the board on our progress with these commitments so that they don't get lost. First, we had committed to 58% of students meeting their projected growth targets in reading as measured by the MAP assessment. And as I shared, we exceeded this target with 60% of our students meeting their growth targets. Second, given the fact that we're currently implementing a new math program, we're reviewing our baseline data this summer and establishing a growth target goal in the area of math. And we'll be sharing this goal with the board this fall. Third, we had hoped to identify common formative assessments and targets which measure student growth in math, reading, and our encore subjects. And we have had many revisions to some of the assessments that we're using in encore. And we've started looking at possibilities in both reading and in math. We piloted a common formative assessment this spring. It actually just gave us the opportunity to look at our reading instruction through the shared lens of a common assessment. And so we're doing some sort of experimental work in that area. But because of the potential implications that this might have with the student growth component of our new evaluation plan, we're going to be focusing on this over the course of the next school year with representatives from the evaluation committee and with subcommittees of teachers who are interested in looking more closely at assessment. So the last two deliverables that we identified in October were related to high-impact instructional strategies. One of the things that we had shared is that over about the past 4 years, some really incredible research has come out related to the impact of the positive impact of some specific instructional strategies on student learning. And as we've discussed at the board table, two strategies which have a significant impact are formative assessment and response to intervention. So this past year, we really targeted these two areas of learning for our staff. So to support staff with the development of these strategies, we set two goals. First, we said by the end of this school year, 40% of staff members would attend the 7 strategies of assessment for learning. And we actually had 42% of staff members attend this training this year. And this training, as we have discussed, supports differentiation of instruction. And then second, we had said we want all of our principals and our curriculum specialists, our instructional technology coaches, and our building level teacher leaders to attend NWEA's Climbing the Data Ladder. And we actually had leadership teams from each school come to this workshop in January and begin thinking about how we can support students with meeting their growth targets in reading and in math. So thinking about how we interpret our MAP data to support students with setting goals and achieving them. It's important to keep in mind that we're in flux right now in terms of state level assessment administration. So this past spring, we administered the ISAT for the last time, right? In 2012-13, about 20% of the questions on the ISAT were considered Common Core aligned. And this past year, the ISAT was considered 100% Common Core aligned. But because of the changes to test questions, this will essentially be a standalone assessment, right? And it's going to be hard to compare our performance over a number of years. But we'll still look closely at the data and see what we can learn from it for this year's students who took the assessment. The PARC, as you know, will be implemented as our new state assessment this year. So we'll administer performance-based assessments in March and our end-of-year assessments in May. And we'll continue to implement the Common Core aligned version of the MAP assessment because while we're building a baseline related to the PARC assessment, this will be our only longitudinal data that's available to our district outside of other assessments that are a part of classroom assessments or the educational ends framework. When we think about sort of what we're going to be focusing on or creating momentum around going forward, last year, district professional development focused on the implementation of the Common Core standards with an emphasis on technology integration. Teachers across the district focused on instructional strategies to support the rigor of new standards in both reading and math. In recent years, we've seen significant research that is focused on, as I said, high-impact instructional strategies. And we know that two of the most powerful of these strategies are related to formative assessment and to response to intervention. So formative assessment supports differentiation of instruction and enables teachers to target the growth of individual students. And response to intervention is a process that helps teams work together to problem solve around how to customize instruction for students. So by the end of next year, it is our goal that all teachers have had access to the additional formative assessment training, and that we continue to support teachers with the use of data to inform instruction. We'll also continue to work on refining our educational ends assessments so that they provide information that most accurately reflects our learning priorities. And then, of course, next year, through collaboration with the instructional tech coaches, our curriculum specialists, and our department chairpersons, we'll continue to provide support for teachers with the implementation of the Common Core with technology integration. And this work will be critical as we move into our 21st Century Learning Plan and our one-to-one initiative. So I like this slide, and we've talked about these concepts before, and I think they're really important for us to keep sort of in the front of our minds. There are three educational researchers, Jim Knight, Mike Schmoker, and John Hattie, would suggest that sustainable school improvement happens when we adopt and act on certain mind frames. And basically what all three of them say is that as educators, we need to look at ourselves as action researchers. So where our fundamental task is really to evaluate every day our effect on student learning. And really that we need to acknowledge that sustained school improvement happens when we look at and act on the data. And when we work smarter, when we seek out and implement high-impact teaching practices. And then they also bring up this other idea, which I think is important. They say that successful school cultures recognize and celebrate the professionalism of educators. So while our performance in District 64, I think, is certainly something that we can be proud of as a community, I know that we will also continue to challenge ourselves to further improve by focusing on those recommendations for moving forward.
Thank you, Lori. This is always an interesting, illustrative, and confusing topic. Every time we get a hold of this, frankly, I don't think that we get enough of this, and I do appreciate your efforts every time to try and make this as clear as a bell for us to understand. One thing I noticed here, and I guess it deserves a question to you, you show us comparisons of district output compared against national norms, and I understand that that is the absolute basic comparison. Probably would become a much more valuable comparison once the park goes in, because there's much more standardization with that. But what value do you see, if any, in showing comparisons of District 64 against other North Shore suburbs and North Shore districts that are our comparables, and that we frequently hold ourselves up to?
So that's something that we typically do around our ISAT data. It's challenging to do with our MAP data because I don't have access to everybody's MAP database the way that I have access to everyone's ISAT scores, or the way that we'll have access to everyone's PARC scores. But I think certainly one of the things that the board has made a commitment to is looking at those comparables, right? And just sort of keeping in mind not only how we shake out compared to sort of the national norms, but also to that comp group. And we can certainly continue to do that with with the ISAT and with the PARC assessment. The ISAT, as I said, will be much more challenging to interpret this year because it is sort of a standalone test. And because of the widespread PARC field testing, our ISAT data doesn't include every single student in District 64 for every test. But it's certainly something that we can do going forward with the PARC.
The other thing I was wondering if you can clarify, 60% is an enviable number in reading, and congratulations, we're definitely on our way to 63 there. I think that's a high, significant number. What things, what procedures, what policies, what goals, what practice will be followed to continue that momentum? What innovations will be rolled out? Any, in other words, are we staying the course, or are we going to tweak it a little bit to continue pushing it? And then the same kind of question for math, to reverse that dip and to get that on the road to going higher.
Sure. Two things that we're continuing to focus on are formative assessment and our response to intervention. And so both of those initiatives give us a framework for problem solving around students who are struggling or students who require an additional challenge. One of the things that Dr. Bresnahan and the instructional tech coaches and the curriculum specialists and the department chairs and I have talked about is the impact that technology will have on both of those initiatives. But one of the things that we've seen happening in classrooms that is so powerful is this idea around teachers being able to get immediate feedback from students about where they are in their learning and being able to change the direction of learning in that moment in response to what students are saying. We have in our Encore department, several departments right now who are focusing on creating digital portfolios with students and setting goals with students and supporting students with collecting evidence about how they're doing with their goals. And they'll be using technology to be able to do that very quickly so that it doesn't interfere with some of the other things that they're doing, their projects in art or their performances in music or their physical activity in PE, or they're playing their instruments in instrumental music. So we see the applications of technology really bringing a lot of momentum to both of those initiatives. In terms of math, we're going to be digging deeper and deeper into the data, but at first blush, we know that that the curriculum is different than it used to be. And when the curriculum is different in math, it's a little bit different than when the curriculum changes in reading. So in reading, there are some skills that sort of spiral throughout your grade level experience. So you're building skills and you're applying them at deeper and deeper levels to more challenging texts, to the creation of different multimedia projects. But in math, you can actually, your skills can build upon one another, but you can actually explore a new topic at each grade level. And so we're building students' background knowledge so that the scope and sequence of the math curriculum flows in a different way. And so I think we probably have about another year of working through those kinks until we're back on track with that. And as I said, when I talk to my counterparts in other districts, they are also experiencing that in math. The core is just, those topics are aligned differently than they have been in the past.
Is a way to think about that it's almost as if, at least my experience with my three boys was, they almost missed some fundamentals, right? And that's what got translated to the results as well. It was almost as if some very basic things for fractions got missed, and they weren't able to sort of build, as you said, kind of build upon that. So I guess more specifically, how is the district then looking at those? Because I was thinking that was just a one-year phenomenon, right? That we would play kind of this catch up, and next year everybody'd be back in sync and everything would be okay. But you're actually suggesting it's probably another year of
Yep.
issues.
I think before we see that trend line begin to significantly change, because I think the adoption of these core resources is going to have a significant positive impact on our learning in math. One of the things that we're spending a considerable amount of time doing this summer is math curriculum mapping. So we have teams of teachers, kindergarten through 8th grade, coming together to identify the pacing, the learning targets, the assessments, the core resource lessons that align with the learning targets, and then additional supplemental materials that we found really engage and support students. And later this summer, I'll have an update for you. We had administered a survey at the end of the year to teachers about our core resource, and we're using that data to sort of help us flesh out our math curriculum maps. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're mapping the curriculum. Next year, we plan to have additional intensive professional development to continue to support people with the implementation of the curriculum. I think your first time through anything, you do see that implementation dip. People were sort of scaffolding what they know about teaching math to what was new in the resources, and so next year I think they'll be in a better position to sort of delve more deeply into the core resource. So I see those two things.
Laura, do we have enough resources available to the staff to get up to speed on these new changes? Or do you envision more personnel being needed to get this area up to speed? Or is it just a matter of time to let this evolution undergo its natural course?
You know, it's time, but it's a coached process. And so I think the investment in professional development is what's most important. So providing people on those early release Wednesdays and on institute days, in addition to release days, with the opportunity to look at their units that are coming up and talk with their colleagues about instruction and pacing and resources.
But you can't make everybody go to those sessions, right? We have 42% attending those sessions.
Well, that's how many we've had so far. But those have been full. So we've had a waiting list for those. So and that's our formative assessment workshop. But as far as release days for supporting people with math, we certainly have in the past said, second grade teachers, we're coming together on this afternoon. Get us up and we're going to meet and walk through trimester 1 for math, or meet and walk through trimester 2. So those pieces are typically mandatory grade level meetings that we have. Yeah. And certainly on our early release Wednesdays, we have grade level meetings on our district directed early release Wednesdays where we can do some of those similar things.
Laura, you were, I have a couple questions here, if I may ask. You referenced the 2006 NWEA growth study. To a layperson, 2006 seems like a while ago to have research and benchmarks, and things have changed and everybody's moving forward. Is there nothing newer?
You know, there isn't. And I talked with NWEA about this, and they don't have an update on what that high achieving piece looks like in terms of growth norms, so we're still referencing that. They are doing another norm study, I want to say this coming year.
Okay.
So we should be able to get some more information.
And that's the Northwest Educational. Are there other groups that opine on this?
There aren't, because this is specific to their assessment, to NWEA's assessment, the MAP assessment.
Okay. You had mentioned, too, something that caught my ear as you were speaking, and that was that this is an assessment that goes beyond national borders. It's global. Do we have anything that says how we compare as a district to the global scores?
We don't. Well, you know what? I'm going to have to check, but I think that performance is wrapped up in the norm study. But let me call tomorrow and see, and I can shoot you an email about that.
I was just curious because,
Yeah.
Not being an educator, but everything you read talks about our nation maybe slipping a little.
Benchmarking,
And so I was kind of
yeah.
curious as us as a district, are we just barely, if we're better than the nation, Well, that's good, but maybe that's not good enough for kids who are going to live in a more global society. So I was just kind of curious about that. You answered my questions about the implementation dip and for how long. Two follow-up questions that I have. One is, in the future when we adopt new materials, should we take this as a learning opportunity and say, you know what, maybe we need to start the professional development earlier before the actual implementation of the tools so that our teachers have a year or two of working with this, so maybe we can make that implementation dip less than 1 year or something. And I don't know if that's possible. I know with computer science it's often challenging if you're not using it to teach it and retain it, but I didn't know with professional development, something like this, should we think about, you know, when we've got to come up with history or something next, should we build in an extra year after we say we're going to buy this to have some development time? I don't know, I just thought I'd throw that out there as an idea.
Yes, and our professional development around the Common Core standards actually happened earlier than our adoption of the core resource. So 3 years ago, probably, Diane Betts talked to you about teams in the district working to unpack our priority standards, right? And looking to identify priority standards in every subject area. And so that work was already well underway when I came on board. So we had teams of teachers who had worked as a part of the strategic planning process to do that. In doing that, they unwrapped all of the Common Core standards in math. And teams of teachers had professional development connected to the core prior to the adoption of the core resource.
Okay, and then my last one, and this is more, I guess, an opinion, but I just wanted to discuss it with you for a minute. So, sitting on the sidelines, really good seat, but still sitting on the sidelines, not being an educator. It's always seemed to me as a district like we've done a little better in reading than in math, to put it in really, really simple terms. And again, from my perspective, if I had my druthers, I'd almost like to see math leapfrog that just a little bit. Not that all curriculum isn't important, but it seems there's a growing emphasis on math in our world. And so when I see this implementation dip, and I see this as 2 years, and we were already a laggard, not a laggard, but you know what I mean, it's lagging math a little bit. I'm a little concerned when I was reading through this, the action plans use word like maintain, continue, refine, and continue again. And I'm almost wondering if maybe as a board we got to think about, or have you guys opine to us, should we think about a way of, let's keep reading where it is, right? That's critically important, but is there a way to jumpstart math maybe more than just what we're thinking of now? Because I really would like to get it at least there, if not higher. Again, one board member's opinion, and it probably warrants a discussion among all, but I just, over the years, over the 4 years I've been here, it just seems it's always trailing a little bit, and I'd love to see it catch up or surpass, given the world the way it seems it's going from my vantage point. So I don't know if that's something I'd throw out on the table for all of us, if anyone else has interest in, or if you're not that as concerned as I am, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Well, what I'd love to see us do is dissect those MAP scores with math by teacher in a grade, so that we can look at the teacher that is got a higher than average, and we can say, what is that teacher doing? What are some of their lesson plans? What are some of their unit tests? And I just think we could hit a home run by looking at that by grade level, by school. Because I guarantee you there's teachers out there that need more development, and why don't you try this test? Why don't you try this approach?
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that this workshop that our teacher leaders attended in January, leadership teams from each school attended in January, focused on using a scope and sequence that's part of the MAP assessment called Descartes. And what Descartes says is, if you're working in this RIT band, here are the skills that you have already mastered, and here are the skills that you're ready to learn, right? And so some of that information is coming back to the building level more formally, and teams of teachers are sitting and looking at kids who are in different instructional bands and deciding how they're going to differentiate instruction for these groups of kids using that information. And then another piece that's sort of connected to that is at the building level, our principals have organized what are called data days. So there are days during the school year where teachers have some release time to come together and look at students who are performing below benchmark and identify how they're going to support those kids with mastering those concepts. So there are some sort of processes that are in place at the building level, and a large part of our work this summer is thinking about how we want to formalize some of those structures.
You know, Scott, to follow up on your comment and just give you a reaction, and I'll give sort of a high-level comment that doesn't really relate to these data and necessarily this presentation. But when I think about subject areas that worry me as a board member, math is definitely one of them for the same reasons that Scott indicated. So as we start thinking longer term about goals as far as student learning, I too would like to see an emphasis on math. And of course, you've already just switched the math curriculum. So to some degree, your answer to what are you doing about math ought to be, hey, look, I just got a new curriculum over time. It should solve some of your problems. But, you know, one of my worries is math. Another one of my worries is writing. And that is particularly a worry because it used to be measured under the ISAT. And when it was measured under the ISAT, our scores in writing tended to lag our scores in reading and math. They were kind of so-so. And now the state of Illinois doesn't have an ISAT test for it because they had budget cuts. So we don't really have good visibility into, you know, unless I'm wrong, Lori, we don't have good district-wide visibility in how our kids are doing on writing. So that's the second area that worries me. And then two other areas that worry me a little bit are foreign language, where we don't really focus on as a board level, and I worry that we may miss some opportunities that may be out there. And this, Lori can silently roll her eyes because this is one of my pie in the sky ideas. I would like to see us teaching our kids to code as a 21st century piece of our curriculum. And that strikes me as a missed opportunity, and one that probably most public school districts are missing right now. So we shouldn't be ashamed of missing that opportunity at the moment. But those are maybe the four areas of curriculum that keep me awake a little bit when I think about our performance. So, for what it's worth. Well, in a perfect world, I think every one of our students should know how to code, should know how to program a computer when they leave 8th grade. That it should not be an elective. It shouldn't be something the boys do and the girls don't do. It shouldn't be something that people do if they don't like doing, you know, LA-related things. It should be something that everybody does. Not that we think everybody's going to turn into a professional coder, but my big idea would be I think we've gotten to the point where some familiarity in that is at least on the par as some familiarity with trigonometry and with, you know, U.S. history, et cetera.
That is an ambitious goal.
Yeah, and it's not one we're going to implement overnight, but so, you know, I start with the prosaic and move toward the more out there.
You know, John, those comments make me think of the curriculum in toto and the educational ends in specifics. And I know that you have mentioned in the past that there is a yearly review of educational ends, and the specifics in that, you know, are more fine-tuned. But, you know, you can set your educational ends here, you can set your educational ends here, and, you know, you can have an upslope, downslope, whatever. So we've mentioned these things and we've talked about these things, but I don't think that I'm certainly not aware of any goals of where we want to be in 3 years and 5 years with these educational ends, and what the point is. Where are we heading with some of these choices? You know, obviously we're doing pretty good as is. We're implementing a new math curriculum. We've got new testing coming in, new methods of teaching to these new testing forms. I get all that. But, you know, the overall position of where our educational ends are going to be, you know, are they going to be continue on as is? Are they elevating? I guess what I'm asking is what is the end point for the next year, the 3-year, the 5-year, the 7-year, the long-term looks?
Well, as a part of the new legislation related to teacher evaluation, we will all be working to add a student growth component to our evaluation tool, right? And one of the requirements of that growth component is type 2 assessments. And so type 2 assessments are assessments that are given across the district, right? Common formative assessments. And so we have some assessments that are currently a part of our educational ends framework, but those assessments typically tell us about the growth of individual students from year to year at a certain point in time, and it's typically spring to spring, right? And what we need for our teacher evaluation tool are assessments that help us look at student growth over the course of a school year. So from fall to spring, right? Because those students belong to a teacher or to a group of teachers during that time period. So I do see that as we make, as we work with the evaluation committee, it's a cooperative experience, right? We're going to be collaborating with teachers to work on the student growth piece. But I do see that as we begin to build those assessments will most likely become our new educational ends framework, because those will be the bank of assessments that we're going to say we value as a district because they give us the best information possible about student learning. So I see some of our educational ends assessments that we have either being thrown out or refined or completely reinvented.
And you think that that will come about through the process of the teacher evaluation, beginning that process, right? Which technically has to begin, right? Because it has to be implemented by 16, right? So we really need to start doing that. Is it this year?
Yes. So, it's the decision of the joint committee how that happens, right? So we have to wait and pull the joint committee together, and we did this spring have a Google Hangout with a representative from the IEA and from the CEC who shared information with us about the legislation and about the process. And the evaluation committee we audited our current evaluation tool, right? And found out where our gaps are in terms of being in compliance with the legislation. And we learned a little bit about other tools that are available to us. And now it's time for us to start also at that same time thinking about the student growth piece. So we have a lot of work ahead of us this year, but the student growth piece really dovetails nicely with that concept of our educational ends framework.
Well, the only problem I have with that is if the educational ends is partly going to be set by merit evaluation of the teachers, the natural inclination would be to make those educational ends more easily attainable. So I'm concerned that the educational ends will be modified or artificially restrained, and the impetus for growth will be held down because that's part of the overall evaluation of the staff. So there's a factor in there that kind of resists continual growth of those educational ends. How do you overcome some of that?
You know, in districts that have gone ahead and have begun to pilot student growth assessments, they haven't found that. The assessments actually have had a lot of integrity. I know when we've worked as a district, sort of unrelated to student growth, but when we've worked as a district to create a common formative assessment, when we go to sort of calibrate our grading of materials, we never find, or of student work, we never find that people are too easy on their students. You know, sort of the integrity in the grading is there. We just did this past January. We had a K-5 writing prompt, where students looked at different resources about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and then had a written piece. And then we used a rubric to sort of assess where students are and help them set goals. And not everybody scored well on the assessment. So I think I haven't seen that the integrity comes out when it's connected to evaluation. Also, those products, those assessments are an agreement, right? So they're not created by one group of people. So everybody has to agree that they measure student learning effectively.
Hence the difficulty in establishing this.
We're up for the challenge.
Yeah, okay.
It'll be good.
Any other comments?
I did have one.
Great.
So, and I apologize if I don't remember correctly from our earlier session in regards to how we're going to measure student growth for reading, but 58%, maybe you can refresh my memory how we landed on that number, right? Because ambitious growth is 63%. So it seems kind of strange to me that, here we are in District 64, average is cool. Like, I would think it's 63 or higher is where we should be.
58 is above average, right? But we had said that we wanted our new 3-year average to be at, and I needed to open my notes to look at it, but we had said we had hoped that our new 3-year average would be closer to 63%. And so we had set incremental goals to help us get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I have to look at my notes.
It was on the
and
way
check.
to 63.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So the idea was it was 58 this year, something higher than 58 next year, and something higher than that the year after.
Well, we should state that then in here.
Okay.
I think that we should, because I'm reading this is like, hey, 58, that's great, and 58 is, it lands on your average. You could say it's above average, but it lands on average, and I'm not comfortable with that. So if we say that our goal is going to be 63 by a certain period, and we have a reason for that, I have a higher comfort level with that. Now, that's just my opinion, and it's probably something we should talk about during our retreat. But to have a goal of 58, and what was it? And last year we were at 60. So our goal is below what we're at today, and it's again below ambitious. For me, that definitely needs further discussion, and it's something that should be on the agenda at our retreat. I would say that would be one thing that I'd like us to all reach agreement on, consensus on. The other thing is, we said they were going to wait to have a math goal till the fall that we could agree on. Why couldn't we have that sooner?
We were going to pull together representatives from the math department just to set it in the fall. We had waited until this spring map data, which just came out at the beginning of June, really, to have a new baseline, to see what that baseline looked like based on our new curriculum.
Because you just recently got the information, so you need a little bit of time to digest it. Okay.
Maybe one other comment. And Lori, I think one thing you may sense from the board is a hunger to have a very few clear targets as to what we're shooting for in the area of student learning. One of the problems we have in the student learning area is there are so many topics, so many assessments, and it's easy for us to fall into the idea of every one of them is equally important. I think soon we will probably need some help on the part of administration of guiding us as to what you recommend that we ought to be focused on. Otherwise, I think you'll find us focused on standardized test scores because that's what we know and what we understand. And so, my worry is we will end up with board-imposed goals on reading and math from a retreat session where we will make them up with a whiteboard handy. What I would rather see is administration say, look, I know all of this is important, but the 3 things we really want to accomplish in the next 2 years are X, Y, and Z, and those 3 things make sense to us and are actually quite challenging. and more than just a prediction of where we're going to get to anyway. And I think there's still a good opportunity for, administration as you strategize as to where the district needs to go to do that. My worry is that if it doesn't happen soon, what you'll find is a temptation on the part of the board to just slap a goal on the part tests or on the map tests.
And John, I think you articulated that well. Kind of that's where our thought is, and we talked about that last year a little bit. Is we just want to have clear, concise goals, and I think you've done a nice job on the reading part of helping us get what you think is a nice measurable goal. My concern is how we articulate that to community. 58%. I don't understand why it would be at 58%. And I apologize. Maybe it's been a couple months since you talked about it last. I just don't know why we would land on that number. And if it is a short-term number and we're going to grow to a long-term number, I want to make sure that is something that we are stating and that's clear. But as John also stated, it's not for this board's necessarily spot to make that decision. I mean, you're the experts on it. You've got the background on it. I would just like you to help us articulate what the goals are, what we should be measuring on, clear, concise, because we don't want to go through, well, we've got a 100-page plan. We want to have a couple clear goals we can state to the community. And then also the board to say, yeah, we're all on board. That makes sense to us. Let's roll with that. So, maybe it sounds like, if I'm correct, you're comfortable having the discussion with us on reading a little bit more at the retreat in a couple weeks, but the math we got to wait on, is that?
We can look at the math and identify sort of a placeholder goal for it and talk with the math department when we come back in the fall. One of the things that I really liked about the reading piece was that we had an investment from all stakeholders, because we went to all the different departments and worked with QITs to sort of identify what that target might be. I just want to point up here for a minute. In October, following the board study session, we were directed to sort of come up with what these deliverables would look like, right? Connected to the board consensus goals. And so one of the things that I think we should do, but then we sort of shared this, and I've certainly, our departments have been working on it all year, which is how I was able to share with you where are we at in terms of our commitments. But what I'm hearing from the board is we're not sure who we married, right? We're not sure what we all committed to. So I think it might, and this presentation actually has our 2014 deliverables, right? We went through and we brainstormed our 2015 deliverables. We looked at our 2016 deliverables and our 2017, right? And we talked very extensively about what this might look like in terms of a new 3-year average. But I think that just from a process standpoint, this was maybe more of a presentation and less of a conversation. And it sounds like, as a team, we might want to come back and sort of look, is this what we want to commit to for the next 3 years? Is this what we want to commit to for the next 3 years? And maybe that would be something that could happen at a board retreat at some point this summer or this fall.
Yeah, we got one scheduled for a couple of weeks.
Well, let me clarify some points here. First of all, a lot of thoughts have come out tonight, and I think, John, you did summarize it very well. I think identifying very specific points is critical for our understanding, for the general public to understand. And I'm very happy and proud that last year, for the first time, we were able to set up some very specific measurables going forward for the first year. And I think it was a very good start to the process. However, this year's study session is going to be quite different from last year's. There's a lot more going on this year. We have a new superintendent coming in. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And I think identifying that relationship and setting some goals up for that individual going forward is going to be quite important right out of the chute. That's not to denigrate or to put aside any of this curriculum information, but I do believe that very soon thereafter, pulling everybody back for a special curriculum meeting to identify some of this information is going to be important. I do not believe that, first of all, we can't get all of this accomplished in one meeting over this weekend, Friday night and all day Saturday. It's impossible. We need to do what we need to do on that Friday and Saturday, and then set up a time where we can delve into this. Now, whether the board chooses to do it at the end of July, middle of August, maybe there's a better time for you, you'll have more data available. But when that time comes, that's the time to sit down and identify some of these measurables and understand where we're at, where we want to go, and under what time frame. So I'm all with you, Dan, and I totally agree with it. It's just a matter of timing over the summer, that's all.
Well, if it's timing and with the change in superintendent, I understand that, but I just like to make it clear that I don't see anything more important than this subject.
No question.
So that's my opinion, and if we're not gonna have a fruitful discussion in 2 weeks, then that's not the time to do it. But we need to address that, and we need to say, how are we gonna measure success for curriculum? What are our goals for curriculum? It's nice that we talk about the other things, they're important things, but at the end of the day, this to me is most important. And so we gotta talk about that.
Yeah.
And as one board member, I just think we have to caution ourselves to teaching to the test. You know, we can sit here and get our MAP scores up to a certain level to compete, you know, with the North Shore, but that concerns me also.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about last year, or in October, when we looked at these deliverables, was that we want to be conscious at what point are our kids doing so well at meeting their growth targets that to do better we would need to game the test, right? And I had given the example of, for example, if more third graders could meet their growth targets if they knew what a sonnet was, would we do it, right? And we had said no, we wouldn't change the fidelity of the curriculum to do better on the test. So there might be a point where we say, boy, you know what? 62% of our students are meeting their growth targets, and we're really pleased with that because we can look at the structure of the test and see that to go any farther, we'd really have to compromise what we think is fidelity in terms of the curriculum. So I think that's a really important point. It's something we always have to be conscious of when we set targets. Every assessment has its limitations. You know?
But at the same time, we can communicate to the public, these are
Yes.
our goals, this is where we were, this is where we're headed, you know.
And I'm not saying to teach the test. What I'm saying is that, and in society, in every job you have, you're measured on growth, right? Business, sports, everything is measured on growth. So that makes sense to me. It's what the administration recommended. And for us to have ambitious growth sounds a lot better than average growth. And I think it should be a fair expectation. And if it's not, you'll explain that to us why, and we'll move on from there. But for me, the growth is what makes the world go round and what we should expect from our students and from ourselves.
Okay, any other comments? And if not, Becky, you've got a few items to discuss with us.
Annually, we ask the Board of Education to make some internal transfers of earned interest income into the education fund. And the first agenda under Appendix 3 is to transfer $176,377.80 from the working cash fund into the education fund.
Are there any questions for Becky on this? And if not, would anybody like to make a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64 Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois adopt Resolution 1121 authorizing the transfer of $176,377.80 interest earned from June 2013 through May 2014 from the working cash fund to the educational fund on or before June 30th, 2014.
Second.
Dathan? Okay, we have one in abstentia, so let's start on Dan's side.
Aye.
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 Yes?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Under Appendix 4 is the transfer of interest income from the debt service fund to the education fund in the amount of $32,566.17.
Any questions for Becky on this issue? I'm not seeing anything. A motion, please?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, adopt resolution number 1122, authorizing the transfer of $32,566.17, representing the interest earned from June 2013 through May 2014, from the Debt Service Fund to the Educational Fund on or before June 30th, 2014.
Second?
Second.
Okay, starting on Vicky's side.
Aye.
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 Yes?
Aye.
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 Appendix 5 is the annual adoption of the prevailing wage, the Illinois Prevailing Wage Act, and we are required to do this on an annual basis. We post it in the newspapers, and we're asking the board to approve this tonight.
This is a yearly thing,
Yes,
Becky?
sir.
Yes, it is. Any questions on this particular item? Not seeing any. Is there a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, adopt resolution number 1123 regarding the Illinois Prevailing Wage Act as provided by the Illinois Department of Labor.
Second.
And let's start on Dan's side.
Aye.
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 Yes?
Aye.
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 Okay. Consent agenda. This is our usual potpourri of personnel reports, bills, payrolls, and benefits. And there's one specific line item in there for approval of bid for asbestos removal. Is Scott here? Or Becky, if you want to speak on the asbestos removal, is that all part of the field project? Or is that Franklin?
It's at Franklin Elementary
Franklin.
School, and it has to do with some carpet replacement. And to do that, we have to abate the asbestos underneath.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda of June 23rd, 2014, which includes the personnel report, bills, payroll, and benefits, approval of May financials ending May 31st, 2014, approval of resolution with PMA Financial Services, approval of Maine Township School Treasurer Depositories, approval of bid for asbestos removal, and destruction of closed audio minutes, of which there are none.
Is there a second?
Second.
Dathan?
Sorry.
But Vicky, you can go first.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
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 Approval of minutes. Any questions regarding any of the minutes? Not seeing any. Can we have a motion for approval of minutes?
I move that the Board of Education, Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the minutes. Special board meeting on June 9th, closed session minutes on June 9th, 2014, and May 19th, 2014, and regular board meeting on May 19th, 2014.
Second.
Thank you. And we'll start with Dan.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
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 Dr. Bender, board member liaison reports.
There were none since the last meeting.
Okay. In other items,
Under information, you'll see the upcoming agenda. Most notably, those agendas marked for the approval of a new board member replacement. Also, you will also see a memo of information on follow-up on collection of student fees. There were no district committees this month for minutes, as well as a memo on update on summer construction projects, which will continue at each regular meeting until the field project is completed. And I believe, Dr. Burley, there's a discussion of student fees, I think. Dr. Burley.
yes. Prior to getting to that, I just want to refer back to the Collins report that we find at the beginning of our packet here. And I'd like to refer to this one specific page, Beck, the resource requirements. And I'm looking at the days cash on hand to expenditures in the aggregate view projection summary. And it seems like from this, well, let's just take the days cash on hand. And it looks like we certainly dropped below 120 prior to the 2021 year.
Correct.
And is that the current projections, and how are we to maintain that 120-day drop dead day up until the 2021 point?
Well, if you remember, this document was created prior to the sale of the bonds for the field project, and so that the expenditures for the field project would have been calculated into the reduction of days cash on hand.
Yeah, I didn't know if
So
this
when-
was updated or not.
No, it has not been updated, and we talked about updating it when we do the final budget adoption in September.
September, okay. And then the aggregate view, there's no way for me to determine the dollar amount into a day's cash on hand. And I know that I've seen your reports showing that instead of a bar graph, a linear graph.
Right.
Is there a way to superimpose that on top of that so that folks can see that either way?
Yes, there is, and we will work with PMA, that the firm that helps us with our financial projections, to make sure that graph is updated with that.
That's great. Okay. And so Dan, people are looking at it. One of the things I wanted to talk about, well, two final things. At the conclusion of this regular meeting, we will be going to closed session pursuant to 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C11 to discuss litigation. But the other thing I wanted to bring to the board's attention was a reminder, follow-up discussion, if you will, on student fees. We all have received one email from one member of the community regarding the high student fees and the addition of the cost of a computer to that in grades 6, 7, and 8. And I just wanted to bring it back to the board. This is June, I realize that, and August is not too terribly far away. I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about this particular subject at that time, but I just wondered if the board had any further feelings on how to fund, how to pay for those computers in grades 6, 7, and 8, or if the board still feels comfortable after reflection with its decision and continue with the practice that we have outlined with the district paying for computers in grades 3, 4, 5, and families purchasing them in grades 6, 7, and 8.
Can only give you a personal reaction. I would not say I feel comfortable with what we have set, but I would say the train has left the station on it. I can't imagine how we could at this point decide to, well, I suppose it would be considered good news by everybody if we announced that the taxpayers were going to pay for the computers for grades 6 through 8 rather than the parents. But I can't see that in the middle of the summer we would make a major decision that would either, that would do much about the fees that we've already noticed to parents for the coming year. To me, we always have the same issues we always have. We have very high fees. And we have those fees because if we did not have those fees that high, the taxpayers would be paying for those dollars rather than the parents. The board is always free to decide that our balance between taxpayers and parents is wrong and that we should be cutting costs for the parents and raising them for the taxpayers instead. But that to me is a longer term decision, and not one that we're really in a position to make for the coming year at this point.
Any other comments? Yeah, I think, I don't feel that the train has left the station necessarily. I think, to utilize that phrase, I think we are committed to one-to-one, we are committed to computers at this point, and I think that issue has been firmly resolved. I just wanted to, again, bring back to the board and remind the board of some of the expenses that folks are going to be encountering, and see if there was any desire to revisit. So,
You know, Tony, as I think about this, and you know, I voted for the computer program, but I'm also a believer that there shouldn't be student fees. And I understand at the referendum time, a commitment was made to the community, and so I'm abiding by that commitment that former boards had made, and I'm honoring that. We as a board decided last summer that we were going to try to extend the referendum many years past the original intention of that promise that we made for not having student fees. We promised to go 4 years effectively beyond what it was, a 40% increase of the 10-year promise. And when we did that, we said if we're going to spend money that isn't already forecasted at this point in time, we are consciously making a decision to shorten that extension, right? That's really what we're doing when we did that. If we were going to say we're going to go on a new program, embark upon a new program, the effect of that would be, because we didn't want to change class sizes, we didn't want to, you know, change other things, would be to maybe bring that in a little bit. And so maybe it warrants a discussion among the board, as John said, that balance between taxpayers and parents, right? Does, you know, one way you can accomplish that when you look at this forecast is to say we're going to bring it into 2019 or 2020 in a way of reducing student fees. I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of not paying for these computers. I think there's some ownership and some caring as a result of it, but maybe we can offset those student fees, and that's the only way I can see, because I don't know how we cut that much money out of the budget without doing it, or we change our additional commitment, as I see it, to go beyond 17 as far as we could. Now, I believe we should try to extend it as far as we possibly can, but if we've struck a wrong balance and maybe we overreached a year ago for 21 and need to go to 20, well, maybe we ought to look at what that does and can we do something with student fees and talk about it. But that's the only way I can kind of see in my head. Mothers may have come up with better ideas and I'd love to hear them, but that's the only way I can see we can get out of this pickle.
well, the way I see it, taking that thought process, and thank you for that, you know, you're looking at about a $400,000 expenditure, which is about $100,000 a year. And if I don't think necessarily $400,000 are going to cost us a year on going back to referendum, but I'm wondering if there was a way to amortize that over 4 years so that the hit doesn't hit us all at once. And the other thing, and there's no way, because this is, well, it's not a facility thing, so this really cannot be in any way mitigated somewhat by some of the bond money.
If you will recall, when Elizabeth Hennessy from William Blair and I spoke about the use of that money, we could fund that one-to-one initiative out of those bond proceeds. It will eliminate what we ultimately can do for facility improvements if we choose to do that. But again, that's a board decision as to how they want to expend their money. It would be permissible under the bond proceeds and the bond sale to expend it on the one-to-one initiative.
So probably you could keep the fees where they are. You could decide to lower fees and recognize that you won't get as far in the referendum commitment. You could lower fees and pay for it by doing less work on your facilities. You could lower fees and increase class sizes. You could lower fees and cut something else out of the budget. I'm not quite sure what. And, those are all things the board can discuss. And when I say the train has left the station, I think that, thinking through those options and coming to some kind of consensus in time to change what the average family is going to pay for the coming year, which starts in a month and a half, is not likely to happen, especially because we've already sent out all the notices for how things are going to work for 2014-15.
We have sent notices out through InfoSnap for registration fees. That notice did not include the one-to-one initiative payment. That notice will go...
Sure, but we've told parents about how the one-to-one program is going to work. And plus, I don't think this board is going to make a momentous decision as to the long-term finances of the district from zero to final decision in time to do anything, for this summer. And that's okay. It's a topic we should always be talking about. And even if it doesn't affect the level of fees for 14-15, if board members are interested and make a major change, it will affect the fees for 2015-16.
So I throw it out there. Is there any desire to continue this discussion?
I'm personally very interested in discussing options for reducing student fees. I think it's a very noble pursuit. I think they're high, and public education should be public, so I don't have a problem. And maybe the compromise is an elimination, but maybe it's a reduction of some kind, or maybe we can get them reined in a little. But I'd entertain that discussion and, set aside some time in a meeting to really dig into it further. I know our community finance committee's done a lot of work. I know we need to talk about how they're going to be engaged with us in the future. I think it's an incredibly valuable resource. Maybe it's something strategic we ought to sit down and have a meeting about at some point in time in the future.
And right now, please understand, I'm not specifically talking about reducing student fees. I'm specifically talking about mitigating some of the cost of the computers.
Mhm.
That $300 on top of the existing student fees. And we've agreed last year, as one of the board goals, not to adjust the student fees to maintain the cutoff. And I get that, and I respect that. But the cost, the extra $300 per student, per family, on top of the already high student fees, may be somewhat of a tipping point. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can mitigate some of that cost, if not all, some of that cost of those computers for the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I just wanted to bring that back and see if the board would want to entertain that discussion to see if we can somehow work with Becky and come up with a creative solution.
Well, any creative solution will involve us spending money out of our budget.
Yes.
So, I mean, and it really,
Or bonds.
it's still money out of our budget because the amount of our bonds is already fixed. We're not going to get more bonds because of this. So it comes out of our budget.
Right.
And if it comes out of our budget, it comes out of our referendum commitment. Either that or we find an offsetting expenditure to not make anymore.
Exactly.
Those are always the options.
The cost of the one-to-one device is going to be about $320 when you consider the sales tax that has to be factored into it.
It will be what?
About $320.
$320.
And what about the insurance that people take?
That's an additional $30 up beyond that.
So
$350. That's a lot of money. Well, how about if this is thrown out today for thought? And I will bring it back next time to see if there's any discussion. If there's no discussion, it's a done deal. Just as a way to stimulate some thought on this. Okay.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
Because the notices to all parents at the middle school was going to go out somewhere around the 1st of July. Should we hold off on that notification that they can start paying fees?
Well, I can certainly offer a personal opinion on that. No. The
I-
board has not taken any action
Okay,
this
all
evening,
right.
Becky. And if you want my crystal ball on whether we will eliminate that cost in time for it to matter to the parents this coming year, if I were a betting person, I'd say probably not.
Okay.
Now I'm one board member.
I just want to clarify that that notice is going out on or about July 1.
As right now, we haven't taken any action, so that would have to go out.
Okay?
Okay, just to remind everybody that we will have a special board meeting on Monday, June 30th at 6:30 to review the applications for the vacant board seat. And we will take a vote to go into closed session to discuss 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C11 pending litigation. And I'll need, that was a motion, and I will need to have a second to go into closed.
Second.
We'll take a vote starting with Dan.
So we're voting here just to talk about the TIF, right, in closed session? That's what we're
Yes.
talking about? Okay.
And not to come back into any open session.
Okay. Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll take 5 and come on back.